I used to believe I could handle anything life threw my way. Double shifts, overdue bills, a broken-down car that coughed like an old man. Every time I turned the ignition, I carried them all like bricks in a backpack. But lately, that backpack felt heavier. The fluorescent lights in the corner store hummed faintly above my head as I stood behind the counter, scanning milk and bread for customers who barely looked me in the eye. It was almost midnight. My feet were throbbing in cheap sneakers, and my mind kept wandering to the one place I didn't want it to go, my dad's hospital room. 2 years ago, he was the strongest man I knew, a retired construction worker who could still lift a sack of cement like it weighed nothing. But after the accident and the seizures that followed, he became a shadow of himself. Now he lay in bed most days, staring at the ceiling while the medical bills piled higher than the roof he'd once built with his own hands. I'd sold almost everything worth selling. Mom's old jewelry, my college textbooks, even the guitar I swore I'd play again one day. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. When the last customer left, I leaned against the counter and rubbed my temples, trying to quiet the buzzing in my head. That's when I saw it. A single sheet of paper folded neatly in half, wedged between yesterday's newspapers, and a pack of gum. I pulled it out and smoothed the creases. Private arrangement. Surrogate needed. Discretion guaranteed. Compensation $300,000. My breath hitched. $300,000. The rest of the flyer detailed medical screenings, legal agreements, and a contact number. It was all printed in plain professional font. No flashy promises. No cheap gimmicks. Just cold hard numbers. For a moment, I stood there staring at the page, like it might burn a hole through my hands. My first thought wasn't, "This is crazy." It was, "This could save him." I folded the paper and shoved it in my apron pocket, but I couldn't shake the words from my head as I locked up the store. The icy wind cut through my thin jacket as I walked home. The neighborhood was quiet, almost eerily so. Broken streetlights flickered above cracked sidewalks, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked at nothing. Every step felt heavier than the last. What kind of daughter even thinks about this? What would people say if they knew? But then I saw my dad's face in my mind, his sunken cheeks, the oxygen tank hissing softly beside his bed, and my brother Jamie, only 16, trying to act tough, but waking up every night from nightmares. $300,000 wasn't just money. It was a chance to keep the lights on, pay for therapy, maybe even give Jamie a shot at the future I'd already forfeited. By the time I reached our tiny apartment, my hands were numb from the cold. I slipped inside quietly, so I wouldn't wake Jamie. Dad's room door was slightly ajar. I peeked in and saw him sleeping, his chest rising and falling with effort. I sank onto the couch and pulled out the flyer again. Surrogate needed. The words felt heavy now, like they carried the weight of 1,000 judgments. Could I really do this? Or had life finally backed me into a corner so tight I had no choice? My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. A message from the hospital, reminder payment overdue. Services may be suspended. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there gripping the flyer in one hand and my dad's medical bills in the other, as the question looped through my head like a broken record. Is this the price of saving the people I love? The next morning, my fingers hovered over the phone keypad for what felt like an hour before I finally dialed the number on the flyer. I didn't know it yet, but that call would change everything. I didn't touch the flyer the entire next day. I stuffed it in the drawer beneath my dad's medical forms and pretended it didn't exist. I cleaned, cooked, worked my shift at the diner, and smiled at customers who wouldn't remember my face 5 minutes later. But the numbers followed me everywhere. $14, $327 in overdue payments, $800 for Jamie's winter jacket and school books, and now a new prescription Dad's insurance refused to cover. Every time my phone vibrated in my apron pocket, I flinched, half expecting the hospital to say they were cutting off care. By the time my shift ended, my stomach felt hollow. Not from hunger, but from fear. I walked home under the weight of it all, my mind drifting back to that folded flyer. 300,000. 300,000 meant no more notices taped to our door, no more choosing between groceries and gas. It meant a real chance. But at what cost? The apartment was quiet when I slipped inside. Jamie's bedroom door was closed, a faint glow spilling out from under the crack. He was probably still awake, headphones on, trying to drown out the world. Dad coughed softly in his room. I dropped my bag on the couch and sank down beside it, staring at my hands. They were raw from washing dishes, nails bitten short. I couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. My fingers trembled as I opened the drawer and pulled out the flyer. The paper felt heavier tonight. I stared at the number. It was just 10 digits, but it felt like a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. Still, I dialed. The line rang twice before a man's voice answered. "Private Arrangement Services. This is Mark. How may I assist you?" His tone was calm, clipped professional, like he'd done this 100 times. "Hi," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I saw the flyer about the Surrogate program. Is it still available?" "Yes," he replied. "We're currently reviewing candidates for a private client. May I take your name?" I hesitated for a beat too long. "Sophie Alvarez," I whispered. He asked a few basic questions. Age, medical history, relationship status. I answered honestly, my heart hammering harder with each word. "You sound like you meet the initial criteria," he said. "If you're willing, the client would like to meet you in person for a preliminary discussion. Discretion is vital." "Are you comfortable with that?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up and forget this ever happened. But then I thought of Dad's pale face, of Jamie's hunched shoulders, as he walked to school in a threadbare coat. "Yes," I said softly, "I'm comfortable." Mark gave me an address and time: Thursday, 10 a.m. "It's a private property," he added. "You'll need to bring a photo ID for security." "Okay," I said, my voice barely audible. "See you then, Ms. Alvarez." The line went dead. I set the phone down and stared at it for a long time. My palms were sweaty. My throat felt dry. What was I doing? This wasn't just another odd job. This was bigger. This was my body, my choice, my burden to carry. So 2 days later, I stood in front of a massive iron gate, my breath clouding in the cold morning air. Beyond the gate was a long driveway lined with oaks, and a glimpse of red brick buildings in the distance. This wasn't some shabby office or clinic. This was a private estate. A man in uniform approached the gate from a small booth scanning a clipboard. "Name?" he asked. "Sophie Alvarez," I replied, clutching my ID with damp fingers. He nodded, checked my name off a list, and waved me through. As I stepped past the threshold, my heart pounded so hard, I thought it might break through my ribcage. I whispered to myself so quietly no one could hear, "Am I really going to do this?" I didn't know then that meeting him would change everything, not just for my family, but for me. When the black SUV pulled up to the main building, I caught my reflection in the tinted glass. My hair was pulled back too tightly, my jacket was a size too small, and my hands clutched my worn-out purse like it might run away. "You don't belong here," a voice whispered in my head. I ignored it. The driver, a man in his 50s with a clean buzz cut, opened the door for me. "Right this way, ma'am." The hall I stepped into smelled faintly of wood polish and old leather. American flags lined the walls, and framed black and white photographs of soldiers in action stared down at me like silent judges. At the far end of the hall stood a man. He wasn't what I expected. No gold chains, no smug grin, no air of entitlement. Instead, he wore a crisp, olive-green uniform, with no medals displayed as if he'd stripped himself of ceremony. He stood straight as a rifle, broad shoulders, squared hands clasped behind his back. His face was weathered in a way that spoke more of sleepless nights than of age, and his steel-gray eyes carried a weight I couldn't name. "Ms. Alvarez," he asked, his voice calm but commanding. "Yes," I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. "Daniel Whitaker." He extended a hand, firm but not crushing. "Thank you for coming." He gestured toward a small meeting room off the hall. Inside was a single table, 2 chairs, and a folder placed neatly at the center. "Please, have a seat." As I sat, Daniel remained standing for a moment, as though measuring me from a distance. Then he took his chair across from mine. Fingers steepled. "I won't waste your time," he began. "This is not a typical arrangement. I've reviewed several profiles over the past month, but something about yours stood out." I swallowed hard. "My medical records." "In part," he admitted, "but mostly your letter of intent. You were honest. No embellishments. No sob stories. You wrote, 'I want my brother to have a chance at a life I've already given up.'" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. That's the truth. That's why you're here. Nesats. Daniel opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is the agreement," he said. "Compensation $300,000. Paid in installments throughout the pregnancy. All medical expenses covered. Discretion is paramount." His tone was clinical, almost detached. "I want to be clear," he continued. "This is not about romance attraction, or anything beyond the terms on that paper. I'm not looking for a co-parent or emotional entanglement. I simply want a child before it's too late." The words felt cold, but his eyes told a different story. There was something behind them, a flicker of grief, maybe, or loneliness, so deep it had become a second skin. I took a breath. "You'll use IVF." "Yes. The procedure will be handled at a private clinic. You'll be given time to think, of course, and counseling if you need it. What happens if I say no? Then I thank you for your time, and you walk out of here with no obligation and no questions asked." I stared down at the paper. The numbers blurred as memories flashed through my mind. Jamie coughing in his sleep. My father's frail hands gripping mine. The eviction notice pinned to our door last winter. 300,000 wasn't just money. It was survival. I looked up at Daniel. "I'll do it," I said quietly. His expression didn't change. He didn't smile or frown. He simply nodded once, like a man sealing a deal with himself. "Very well," he said. "We'll schedule the preliminary screening." I didn't know then that behind his calm exterior, he'd already noticed something in my file that would change everything. I thought agreeing to the arrangement would bring me relief. Instead, it felt like stepping off a ledge and hoping the ground would appear beneath me. Daniel didn't waste time. He stood and gestured for me to follow him down a quiet hallway, lined with old photographs. Him shaking hands with other soldiers standing in formation, or kneeling beside children in disaster zones. There was a sharpness to the way he moved, as though every step had been measured in advance. We stopped outside an office door, where a nurse in crisp white scrubs waited with a thin man, wearing glasses and holding a clipboard. Ms. Alvarez, the nurse said with a polite smile. This is Dr. Shepard, the fertility specialist, overseeing the process. He'll take you through the next steps. Daniel nodded toward me. You'll be in good hands. I'll be here if you have questions. For a moment, I thought I saw something soften in his expression, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Inside the office, Dr. Shepard explained the basics blood work hormone cycle's legal consent. I tried to keep my focus, but the words blurred together. IVF, egg retrieval, uterine lining, protocol. I kept nodding, hoping I didn't look as nervous as I felt.
Meanwhile, Daniel sat at the corner of the room, reviewing a file with the same intensity one might use to study a battlefield map. His brows drew together slightly, eyes scanning each line. Then he froze.
There was a line in my medical history printed in clinical language that now felt far too personal. Patient has never been sexually active. I saw the subtle shift in his posture. His jaw tightened. His thumb stopped mid-motion on the page. Dr. Shepard continued speaking, oblivious. Given her first-time status, we'll need to begin with a gentler dilation protocol to ensure stop, Daniel said. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that made everyone else go silent. The doctor blinked. Excuse me. We're not proceeding today, Daniel said firmly. The nurse glanced between us, confused. But Mr. Whitaker, Dr. Shepard, began. Her lab work is excellent. She's a near-perfect candidate. If the concern is the procedural sequence, we can. It's not the procedure. Daniel closed the folder and stood. Everyone out. The room stilled. The nurse hesitated, clearly unsure whether to obey. Now Daniel said, his voice low but unyielding. Slowly the staff gathered their belongings and left the door clicking shut behind them. We were alone. The air felt heavier, like it had thickened with all the words neither of us knew how to say. I didn't shrink back. If this disqualifies me, just say it, I said evenly. Daniel's eyes met mine, steady, but unreadable. You've never... His voice trailed off. I shook my head. No, I haven't. Does that change things for you, Mr. Whitaker? He exhaled slowly, running a hand along the edge of the table. I'm not the kind of man who takes something sacred from a woman just because a contract says I can. His words were soft, but they carried the weight of a decision that felt absolute. I held his gaze, refusing to look away. So, what happens now? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the window, staring out at the sprawling estate beyond. I don't know, he admitted quietly. But I can't ask you to cross that line. Not like this. Not for this reason. He walked out of the room without another word. I sat there staring at the closed door, wondering if the one chance to save my family had just vanished. When I left the estate that day, the air felt colder than it had any right to be. The SUV drove me back to my apartment in silence. I sat in the back seat, hands folded in my lap, like a child waiting to be scolded. But Daniel Whitaker's words replayed in my head, over and over like a broken record. I'm not the kind of man who takes something sacred from a woman just because a contract says I can. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at me with anger or disgust. but the decision in his tone was final. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. This wasn't about me. It was about the bills stacked on the kitchen table, about Dad's oxygen tank, humming in the corner about Jamie's tired eyes as he left for school in a coat 2 sizes too small. This wasn't rejection. It was just logistics. But as the hours passed, my chest tightened. I tried scrubbing the apartment until my hands turned raw. Tried distracting myself by organizing the cupboards, cleaning up the fridge, folding and refolding laundry. Nothing worked. By midnight, I sat on the couch staring at my phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Not that I expected any. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Dad coughing in his room. The rattle in his chest had grown louder this week. I heated up a can of soup, set it on his nightstand, and sat there watching him try to lift the spoon to his mouth. His hands shook so badly I had to help him. "You've been quiet lately," he rasped. "I'm fine, I lied. You're not sleeping, neither are you." We didn't talk after that. There were no words left that wouldn't sound like blame. By the 5th day, the hospital called again. Their tone wasn't harsh, but there was no mistaking the message. "Your father's account is overdue. We need a payment by Friday, or services will be limited." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, holding the flyer I never threw away, $300,000. I thought I'd found a way out. Instead, I was back where I started staring at the walls of this cramped apartment and counting how many meals I could stretch from the last $20 bill in my purse. Maybe Daniel saw something in me that screamed wrong choice. Maybe he realized I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, good enough to carry something as important as his child. The thought made my stomach twist. 1 week after that meeting, a knock came at the door. Jamie answered while I was folding laundry. "Hey, Sophie," he called. "There's some guy here. He says he has a delivery for you." I frowned, walking over. A man in a navy jacket handed me an envelope and left without another word. It was thick, sealed neatly, with no return address. My name was written on the front in precise, deliberate handwriting. Hands trembling, I tore it open. Inside was a cashier's check, made out to St. Agnes Medical Center. $50,000. There was no note, no explanation. Just the cold, hard proof that Daniel Whitaker had found a way to step back into my life, even if only from a distance. For a moment, I couldn't move. Jamie peeked over my shoulder. "Whoa, is that for us?" I shoved the envelope into the drawer and forced a smile. "No, it's nothing. Just a mistake." When Jamie went back to his room, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the drawer. My fists clenched. Was this supposed to make things better? Did he think money could erase the sting of rejection? I wasn't some charity case for him to pat himself on the back about. The next morning, I wrote him a letter. Not out of gratitude, but because I needed him to understand one thing: I didn't agree to this. Out of weakness. I agreed, because it was my choice. I didn't sleep that night. The check sat in the drawer, burning a hole in my conscience. Part of me wanted to rip it up, scatter the pieces in the wind. Another part of me, more practical, more exhausted, whispered that I should cash it, pay off Dad's bills, and stop drowning. But every time I imagined walking into the bank, a knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't charity, I told myself. He wasn't trying to humiliate me, was he? By morning, my decision was made. I pulled out the envelope, smoothed the paper flat, and took a deep breath. I found a sheet of notebook paper from Jamie's school supplies and began to write. Mr. Whitaker, I received the check you sent. If this was meant to help, I understand the intention, but I can't accept it. You see, I didn't agree to the arrangement because I was weak or desperate. I agreed because it was my choice. My decision. The money was never the point, not really. You may have thought stopping the process was an act of kindness, but for me, it felt like you took away the only power I had left to fix what's broken in my life. So I'm returning this to you. Not out of anger, but because I need you to know I don't want pity. I want to stand on my own 2 feet, even if they're shaking. Stephanie Alvarez. I folded the letter neatly and slipped it back into the envelope with the check. The post office clerk didn't even glance at me as I slid it across the counter. No return address, she asked. I shook my head. If he wants to respond, he'll have to find me the hard way. That evening, after Dad drifted into a fitful sleep, and Jamie shut himself in his room with his music, I sank into the couch and stared at the cracked ceiling. For the first time in days, I didn't feel powerless. But I didn't feel free either. Stosh meanwhile, miles away. Daniel sat alone in his study, the glow from a single lamp pooling across his desk. The letter lay open in front of him. His eyes traced each line slowly, deliberately, as though committing them to memory. I didn't agree because I was weak. I agreed because it was my choice. His jaw tightened. The room around him was silent, too silent. The grandfather clock ticked faintly in the corner. Outside, a cold wind rattled the window panes. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at nothing. He wasn't used to women like Sophie Alvarez. Women who didn't beg, didn't flatter, didn't fold under the weight of the world. Women who made choices even when life gave them none. For a moment, he felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was regret or respect. Maybe both. I didn't think I'd ever see him again, but life has a strange way of bringing people back when you least expect it. The bells of St. Mary's tolled softly as I pushed open the heavy wooden doors. It smelled faintly of wax and old hymn books, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. This wasn't where I imagined spending my Saturday morning, but the church paid me $20 an hour to dust pews, mop floors, and keep the place tidy between services. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on. I slipped into autopilot bucket in one hand rag in the other as I worked my way down the center aisle. The stained glass windows scattered sunlight in fractured rainbows across the stone floor. It should have felt peaceful. But all I could think about was the letter I'd mailed a week ago. Had he read it? Had he crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash? Or worse, had it meant nothing to him at all? I was so lost in thought, I didn't notice him at first. Not until a low voice behind me said, "You're thorough." I spun around, nearly dropping the rag. Daniel Whitaker stood in the doorway, dressed not in uniform this time, but in a simple charcoal sweater and jeans. The sunlight caught in his silvering hair, softening the hard edges of his face. "Mr. Whitaker," I said, gripping the bucket tighter. "Sophie," he replied. "May I come in? It's a public building, I muttered. I can't stop you. He walked slowly down the aisle, his boots echoing faintly off the stone. I didn't mean to startle you, he said. I was passing by and saw you through the window. I raised an eyebrow. Passing by. Or following me. Something like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I'm not in the habit of following people. When he stopped a few feet away, I straightened my back. If you came to take back the check. Don't bother. It's already on its way to you. I know, he said calmly. I blinked. You know I received your letter. We stood in silence for a moment, the sound of birds outside the only thing filling the space between us. I didn't come to argue, Daniel said finally. And I didn't come to fix you. I frowned. Then why are you here? He looked at me, not through me, not past me, but at me with those steady gray eyes. To understand. The words caught me off guard, not because they were dramatic or poetic, but because they felt honest. I exhaled slowly. You don't have to understand me. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not, he said, but I want to. Something shifted then. The tension that had hung between us like a taut wire began to slacken just slightly. I gestured toward the pews. I have 15 minutes before I'm supposed to vacuum. If you really want to talk, sit. Daniel hesitated, then lowered himself onto the nearest pew. I stayed standing, arms crossed over my chest. This isn't going to change anything, I warned. Maybe not, he said. But some things aren't meant to change. They're meant to be understood. I didn't know it yet, but that simple conversation 10 minutes in an empty church would be the first thread in something I never saw coming. The bell over the door chimed as we stepped into the little coffee shop on 5th Street. It smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans, a warm contrast to the icy wind outside. Do you come here often? Daniel asked, glancing around the cozy space. Only when I can afford more than instant coffee, I replied. He didn't laugh, but his lips twitched slightly, as if he wanted to. We took a corner booth near the window, away from the murmurs of other customers. I kept my coat on, clutching the cup of tea the barista set down in front of me. Daniel's presence filled the space between us. Not heavy, not imposing, but solid in a way that made the air feel different. This doesn't have to be awkward, he said quietly. Doesn't it? I asked. He shook his head. We're not client and surrogate anymore. Not today. Just two people talking. For a long moment, I stared at the steam rising from my cup. Why do you even care? I asked. You could have just moved on, found someone else, signed the papers, and been done with it. Because I keep thinking about what you wrote in that letter, he said. You didn't agree to this because you were desperate. You agreed because you chose to. I wanted to know what kind of person makes a choice like that. I let out a dry laugh. You think there's something noble about it. I think there's something rare, he said. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I grew up carrying people, I said finally. My mom before she died. My dad after his accident. My brother, even though he's too young to realize it. "You've been carrying them a long time," Daniel said softly. "Feels like forever." I admitted. And there was no judgment in his eyes. No pity either. Just a quiet understanding I wasn't expecting from a man like him. Onenua asked, why a surrogate? Why not just fall in love and start a family, the normal way? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out the window watching the snowflakes swirl in the pale light. "My wife and I tried for years," he said finally, before she passed. "I thought I'd made peace with the idea of never being a father, but lately, I don't know. It feels like there's still time to do one good thing before my time runs out." Something in his voice cracked just slightly on the last word. I looked down at my hands, unsure what to say. We sat there in silence for a while. Not the awkward kind. The kind that feels safe. Like neither of us needed to fill it with empty words. When I finally looked up, he was watching me. Not like I was fragile, but like he was trying to see past every wall I'd built around myself. "You deserve to breathe," he said softly, without cherishing the weight of the world. I swallowed hard. No one had ever said anything like that to me before, and for a moment, I let myself believe it might be true. That coffee shop became our meeting place after that day, not because we planned it, but because somehow neither of us wanted to let go of the quiet we'd found there. It started with coffee. 1 cup turned into 2. 2 turned into a quiet walk down 5th Street, and before I realized it, Daniel Whitaker and I had created an unspoken rhythm. Some days, we met at the cafe on the corner. He'd arrive early, always in that same charcoal sweater, already seated with a cup of black coffee. We didn't talk about the arrangement. We didn't talk about the letter, or the check, or the moment he'd shut the clinic door. We talked about smaller things, how the winter wind whipped through town like it owned the place, how his knee still ached when it rained from an old injury, how I missed drawing something I'd abandoned years ago, when survival became more important than dreams. Other days, I'd find him leaning against the fence post of the field behind St. Mary's. I never asked why he was there. He never asked why I always showed up too. We just stood there together, watching the sun dip below the Texas plains. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes we didn't. But the silence didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt safe. Still, every time I caught myself relaxing, laughing, even something inside me tightened. "Careful, Sophie. Don't get used to this." I knew how this story usually went. A man like him. A woman like me. It was too easy to believe in a kindness that couldn't last. "You've been quiet," Daniel said one afternoon, as we walked along a dirt path near the fields. "I'm always quiet," I replied. He glanced sideways at me. "Not when you're angry," I smirked. "Fair." We stopped near a lone oak tree. The branches stretched wide barren in the winter chill. "You're not used to being seen, are you?" he asked softly. The question caught me off guard. "I'm used to being needed," I said finally. "Not seen." And which one feels heavier? I looked away. "What do you think?" He didn't press further. Daniel wasn't the kind of man who filled silences with noise. He let the quiet do its work. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the way he'd looked at me under that oak tree, not with pity, not with expectation, just presence. Eta dias. And that scared me more than anything, because presence had a way of becoming attachment, and I wasn't sure my heart could survive that. But no matter how hard I tried to keep my walls up, Daniel had a way of slipping past them, one act of quiet kindness at a time. The hospital called me again that morning. At first, I braced myself for the familiar script, overdue payments, urgent warnings, the quiet threat of services suspended. But this time, the woman on the other end spoke with surprising warmth. Ms. Alvarez, she said, "I'm calling to confirm we've received full payment for your father's care through the end of the quarter." My heart stopped. What? Yes. The account has been settled in full, she continued. It was an anonymous payment, but we wanted to inform you for your records. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I didn't have to ask who had done it. That evening, I walked into the coffee shop on 5th Street and found Daniel in his usual spot corner booth, black coffee in hand. He looked up as the door chimed, his expression unreadable. "You paid the hospital bill," I said without preamble. He set his cup down carefully. Yes. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. Why would you do that? Because it needed to be done. I didn't ask you to fix it. He met my glare with calm, steady eyes. I know. Then why? My voice cracked. Do you think I can't handle my own life? That I'm some charity case you can throw money at to feel better about yourself? For the first time, a flicker of something sharp crossed his face. "No," he said firmly. "I don't think that." I crossed my arms, trying to hold myself together. You don't understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end of someone else's pity. Pity isn't why I did it. Then what? What possible reason could you have? Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but unshakable. "Because I don't want to watch you break yourself in half, to carry a load no one could manage alone." The words hit me like a stone to the chest. "I'm not weak," I whispered. "I know you're not." "Then stop treating me like I am. I'm not treating you like you're weak, Sophie. I'm treating you like someone who's been strong for too long." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of clinking cups and quiet laughter from the other side of the shop felt impossibly distant. "Because smeto." "I didn't do this because you're helpless," Daniel said softly. "I did it because I want to share the weight. Not take it from you. Share it." I wanted to yell at him, to tell him he had no right, but instead, I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, and that made me even angrier. "I don't know how to let someone do that," I said hoarsely. "Then let me teach you," he said. I told myself I wouldn't let him in any further. But when everything around me began to fall apart again, he was the only one who stayed. I smelled the whiskey before I opened the door. The sharp, acrid scent hung in the air like a warning. Jamie stood in the hallway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes wide and scared. "Dad's in one of his moods again," he whispered. I set my grocery bags down carefully. How bad Jamie flinched as something heavy crashed against the living room wall. Bad. I found my father in his recliner, an empty bottle rolling at his feet. His face was flushed, his hands trembling as he fumbled with another half-full glass. "You," he slurred when he saw me. "Where the hell have you been working?" I said quietly, trying to keep this place together. "Don't you dare take that tone with me," he shouted, slamming the glass onto the table. The sound made Jamie jump. "Dad, please," I started. "Don't you Dad please me," he roared, struggling to stand. "This is my house, my rules." Then his foot caught on the rug, and he stumbled forward, knocking over the lamp. The crash sent shards of light across the floor. Jamie let out a strangled sound and backed into the hallway. Something inside me cracked. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. So unbearably tired. "I can't do this," I whispered, though no one was listening. An hour later, after coaxing Jamie into his room and locking my father in his own, I sat on the kitchen floor, knees pulled to my chest. The apartment was quiet now, but the chaos still rang in my ears. I pressed my forehead to the cabinet door and felt hot tears streak down my face. "You said you could handle it all." A cruel voice in my head sneered. "You lied." I don't remember pulling out my phone, or scrolling to Daniel Whitaker's number, or pressing the call button, but when I heard his voice, low, steady, unmistakably him, I broke. "Sophie, My voice cracked. "I can't do this anymore." There was a pause. "Where are you home? I'll be there in 20 minutes. I tried to protest, but he'd already hung up. True to his word, 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Daniel standing there, hair damp from the drizzle outside, a quiet intensity in his eyes. He didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. He just stepped inside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to hold everything together. And that terrified me even more than falling apart. He didn't speak when he stepped into the apartment. Daniel took in the overturned lamp, the faint smell of whiskey lingering in the air, the crack in my voice when I whispered. "I'm sorry," I called. "You don't have to be sorry," he said softly. We stood there for a long moment, the quiet between us heavier than words. Jamie was asleep in his room. My father's snores echoed faintly down the hall. For the first time all night, the apartment felt still. I've tried so hard to hold everything together, I said, my voice breaking. But I can't. Not anymore. "You don't have to," Daniel said. His tone was calm, steady. But his eyes, they were something else entirely. They weren't cold or calculating. They weren't the eyes of a man who saw me as a transaction. They were the eyes of someone who saw all the cracks I'd spent years hiding and didn't flinch. "Lefgafas." When he reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, calloused grounding. I felt my knees buckle slightly, and before I knew it, he was guiding me to the couch. We sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, our hands still intertwined. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Do what lets someone in." He didn't answer right away. "You don't have to know," he said finally. "You just have to let yourself be." For so long, I'd been holding my breath. That night, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I let it out. when his arms came around me, it wasn't possessive or demanding. It wasn't about taking. It was about holding. And for the first time in years, I let myself be held. I didn't mean for it to happen. The way his hand brushed a stray hair from my face, the way his thumb lingered on my jaw, the way his lips hovered near mine, like a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. But I answered for him. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deliberate. Every movement felt like a choice, not out of obligation, not because of any contract, but because I wanted it, because he wanted me not as a means to an end, but as I was messy, fragile, real. When I came undone in his arms, it wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of passion you see in movies. It was quiet. Tears slipped down my cheeks as his lips pressed gently against my shoulder. And I realized this wasn't about pleasure. This was about trust. Afterward, I lay with my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Steady, unhurried, like it had been waiting for me all along. "I'm scared," I whispered. "So am I," he admitted. But his arms didn't loosen around me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding the weight of the world alone. The morning light felt softer than I remembered, but part of me wondered if softness ever lasts, or if it's just the calm before life unravels again. It's strange how quickly a year can slip through your fingers. One moment, I was standing in a kitchen with cracked linoleum floors, holding a man I barely knew. The next, I was standing in the sunlit hall of a restored brownstone paint smudges on my hands, and laughter echoing off freshly plastered walls. Daniel bought the house 6 months ago. It had been sitting empty for years. Its windows boarded its foundation, sagging the kind of place neighbors whispered about, but no one dared to fix. But he saw something in it. It deserves a second chance, he told me the day he handed me a set of keys. Just like we do. Now, it's alive. The walls, once gray and crumbling, are lined with shelves of books and bright murals painted by local kids. The old dining room became a classroom. That's where you'll find me most days, teaching art to children whose lives have been marked by the same cracks and scars I used to hide under my own skin. I don't know when it started, this quiet, steady rhythm between us. Daniel never asked me to move in. I never asked him where we stood. We just kept showing up for each other until one day, it felt like we'd been doing it all our lives. But even now, with the sun streaming through the windows and the sound of children's laughter filling the air, there's still a knot in my chest. I keep waiting for it all to fall apart, because that's what life taught me. Happiness is borrowed, and sooner or later, someone always comes to collect. Ase sautitos. I was in thought again. I jumped slightly, turning to see Daniel leaning against the doorway. He was dressed in his usual flannel shirt and work boots, hands streaked with dust from repairing a broken window upstairs. "Just thinking," I said, about what I hesitated, about how fragile this all feels. Like if I breathe too hard, it might disappear. Daniel walked over and set a calloused hand on mine. "It's not fragile," he said quietly. "It's real." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, the voice I'd carried all my life whispered, "Don't trust it. Don't trust him." Don't trust yourself. That night, I stayed late to clean up after class. I ran my fingers over a child's sketch of a tree, its branches tangled but strong, and I wondered if maybe people could be like that too. The next evening, Daniel handed me a small velvet box, but what he said wasn't a proposal. It was something I wasn't ready to hear, and yet couldn't turn away from. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like wet earth and quiet promises. I was in the art room wiping down tables when Daniel's shadow filled the doorway. "Everyone's gone," I said softly. "I know," he replied, stepping in. His boots left faint prints on the wooden floor. There was something in his hand, a small velvet box worn at the edges, like it had been carried for years. My breath caught. "Daniel." "Before you say anything," he said, holding the box out, "just listen." I hesitated, then set the rag aside. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band. No diamonds, no flourishes. "This was my wife's," he said quietly. I kept it for a long time because it felt like holding on to something that made sense. But lately, I realized I've been holding on to the wrong thing. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Claire," he said, using my name like an anchor, "you don't owe me anything. Not your heart, not your future, not even your time." He paused. "But if you want, we could build something new. Together. Not because of obligation or contracts, because we choose to." The words settled over me like a warm blanket, and a sharp blade all at once. All my life love had felt like a transaction. Something you gave because someone needed you, or because you needed them. This felt different. This felt like choice. "I'm not sure I know how to be part of something new," I whispered. "That's all right," he said. "We'll learn as we go." I stared at the ring, then at his hand, still holding it out, and not demanding, not expecting, just waiting. And for the first time in years, I felt the fear in my chest loosen. I reached out and closed my fingers around his. "I'm not saying yes, because I feel like I have to," I said softly. "I'm saying yes, because I want to." His shoulders eased, and for a moment the man who had carried the weight of war, of loss, of 1,000 unspoken regrets, looked almost light. We didn't talk after that. We didn't need to. His hand stayed in mine as we stood in the quiet art room surrounded by children's drawings of trees, birds, and homes. And for the first time, it felt like maybe we could make one of our own. A year later, the house was alive with voices. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was living. The house is alive with voices now. Children's laughter drifts down the halls, mingling with the low hum of conversation, and the faint scent of acrylic paint from the art room. Daniel is in the courtyard, fixing a broken swing with a group of volunteers. His sleeves are rolled up his hands, streaked with dirt, and he looks more at home here than he ever did in those crisp uniforms he used to wear. I watch him from the window, a soft ache blooming in my chest. Not the kind of ache that comes from longing, the kind that comes from gratitude. A year ago, I didn't know this was possible. Back then, Love felt like a luxury for people who weren't drowning. I thought my only worth came from how much I could carry. For everyone else, I was wrong. I think about the girl I used to be, the one scrubbing grocery store floors at midnight, clutching a flyer that promised a way out. If only she was willing to give up the last part of herself. She hadn't already traded for survival. That girl didn't believe anyone would ever choose her, unless they needed something from her. She didn't believe she was allowed to choose for herself. But Daniel changed that. Not with grand gestures, not with flowers or promises whispered under the stars, but with presence, with the quiet way he stayed even when I tried to push him away, with the way he looked at me like I was already enough. Now, I stand in a sunlit room filled with sketches and watercolors, and the voices of children telling me about the worlds they've drawn. One little girl tugs at my sleeve, holding up a crayon portrait. "It's you and Mr. Whitaker," she says proudly. "You look happy." I smile. "We are," I tell her softly. "We really are." That night, after the last child goes home and the center falls quiet, Daniel finds me in the art room packing up supplies. "Long day?" he asks. "The best kind," I reply. He crosses the room, sets his hands on my shoulders, and presses a kiss to my temple. We don't say much. We don't need to. I once thought love was a transaction, something you earned by giving until there was nothing left. But now, I know better. Love, real love, asks for nothing but presence. It doesn't weigh you down. It lifts you little by little until you realize you don't have to carry it all alone anymore. As Daniel laces his fingers through mine, I let myself believe, truly believe, that this time there's no catch, no conditions, no expiration date. Just us, choosing each other every single day. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It arrives quietly in the form of someone willing to stay, even when you're not sure you deserve it. The sun was setting behind the old oak tree outside the center, casting long golden shadows across the courtyard. I was sitting on the steps, watching a group of kids chase each other across the grass, their laughter ringing out like wind chimes. Daniel sat beside me, quiet as always. His presence had become something I didn't have to think about anymore, like breathing, like the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Then, he broke the silence. "Whatever we build next," he said softly, "would you be willing to build it with me?" I turned to look at him. His expression wasn't guarded this time. There was no armor, no carefully measured words. Just a man asking a question, not because he needed me, not because he expected me, but because he wanted me there. My chest tightened not with fear, but with something warmer. For so many years, every choice I'd made came from desperation, from survival. But this was different. "Yes," I whispered. He didn't smile, not right away. Instead, his shoulders eased like he'd been holding his breath, and finally, let it out. "I'm not saying yes, because I owe you anything," I added. "I know. I'm saying yes, because I want to." And then this time, he did smile soft and quiet, the kind of smile that felt like sunlight after a long winter. He reached for my hand, and I didn't hesitate. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't choosing out of fear, or obligation, or guilt. I was choosing because I'd learned how to love, and maybe more importantly, how to let myself be loved in return. The courtyard fell silent as the last of the children went home. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. "Then let's build it," he said. And for the first time, I believed we could. Real love doesn't demand. It doesn't take. It invites you to stay, to grow, to build. And when you're ready, you realize it was never about being saved. It was about being seen.